X is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay. We want to use parentheses. Please. We want to simplify slowly. And before we start, we need it to be equal to 0 or equal to y. Whoop. So before we do anything, please make sure it's equal to 0 because, again, all this lets us do is solve the quadratic for the x-intercepts, and so the y has to be equal to 0. Make sure everything, all your a, b, and c terms are all on the same side. Best practice would be to write down what a equals, b equals, and c equals before you start. So for this one, a is equal to 2. B is equal to -7. That matters, that it's negative. And c is equal to 6. Okay. That a looks weird. I don't like that. Now, we're going to use quadratic formula. We're going to use parentheses as often as we deem necessary. Probably anytime you put a number in, we're going to use parentheses. X is equal to the opposite of b. So notice I did -7. So -1 times -7. Plus or minus the square root. I guess it's going to be a lot inside the square root of b squared. So -7 in parentheses squared minus 4ac, which means 4 times a times c. So -4 and in parentheses times a, which is 2, times c, which is 6. The whole thing, over 2 times a, which is 2. We are going to simplify slowly. So first thing we're going to do is multiply everything we see. And then we'll leave the adding and subtracting and dividing for last. So it's equal to, what's -1 times -7, guys? 7. So it's 7 plus or minus the square root. What is -7 squared? Positive 49. Minus 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 6 is 48, so minus 48. All over 2 times 2, which is 4. I think this one is going to work out pretty nicely for us, which is great. Okay, we're going to simplify it again before we get final answers here. 7 plus or minus, what is 49 minus 48? 1. So plus or minus the square root of 1 over 4. What is the square root of 1? 1. And notice it already has the plus or minus for you, which is great. It reminds you there's 2 answers. So you don't have to put the 2 answers again. So is equal to 7 plus or minus 1 over 4. You're going to get 2 answers. 7 plus 1 over 4. 7 plus 1 is 8. 8 divided by 4 is 2. Okay, that's the first one. And the other answer would be 7 minus 1, which is 6. 6 divided by 4, well, that's going to be a fraction. Please leave it as 1. So 6/4, but let's simplify it to 3/2. So your 2 answers are 2 and 3/2. Let's write them as points. 2, 0, and 3/2, 0. Make sure it's equal to 0. It is, and write down A, B, and C. I'm going to keep it as is. B is -2. C is -22. x is equal to the opposite of -2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, -2 squared, minus 4 times a times c. All over 2 times a, which is 4. Okay, this is, I have to see this. For example, if we were taking a test and you just did the quadratic formula, for the most part, in your head or in a calculator, and you didn't show me any of this work, and you got it wrong, do you think you would get any partial credit for that? No. So you at the very least need to show me this step where you plug in. That would be x is equal to 2 plus or minus. And in the square root, we're going to have 4. Okay, be careful here. Minus 4 times 4 is 16, and then 16 times -22. So let's change that. So it's minus -352. So we can change that to plus over 8. This is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 356 over 8. And I do not believe that's a perfect square. So what we're going to do, shoot, I didn't give you calculators, did I?
Add 2 because that's what
And everyone else, go get a calculator. It would be acceptable for you to leave this in a square root, but I want you to see how to do it with the decimal as well. Let's talk really quick about what, if you wanted to leave it like this, here's what you would have to do. You need to simplify this. So 2 over 8, what would that simplify to? 1 over 4. So you would change this. If you want to leave it, so let me erase. If you want to leave it with the square root, it should be 1 over 4 instead. Since this number is inside a square root, you can't divide it by that number. You can't divide it unless it's outside the square root. What are our 2 decimal answers? Does someone have those? Bella?
2.610 and then -2.110. I left them.
2.1. Is that right?
Yeah, I left it with the whole decimal because it's not extremely long decimal.
Okay, so your 2 answers should be these. And determinant of a quadratic formula, I don't know why it's called that. I didn't use that. I didn't make up the word. It is b squared minus 4ac, and we use the discriminant to determine the number of solutions a quadratic function has. Okay, this is the thing that's inside of the square root, right? So basically what it's saying is that if you have b squared minus 4ac, if it gives you a positive number, there are 2 real number solutions. Like if you get 4, then your answers will be positive 2 and negative 2. If the square root is equal to 0, it can only have one answer, 0. So it would have one real number solution. Doesn't mean the x-intercept will be 0, but the square root would only have one answer. And then if it is negative, like square root of -4, that is what we call an imaginary number, and so it would have no real number solutions, and it would be above or below the x-intercept. So we're just going to find the discriminant for this one, and we'll be done. Again, please write down a, b, and c, but if you look at this right now, it's not set equal to 0. Let's fix it. So it's going to become 2x squared minus 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. A is equal to 2. B to -3, and C to 5. All we are doing is b squared minus 4ac. I want to know if you put that inside of the square root, which is what we do when we do quadratic formula, Would you get a positive number, negative number, or 0? B squared is negative 3 squared minus 4 times A is 2 times C is 5. Negative 3 squared is 9, and then we've got negative 40. So what is it? Negative 31, which would mean it would have a square root of negative 31. Can you take the square root of a negative number?
No.
No, and so we are going to say that it has no real solutions. So basically you're skipping doing the entire quadratic formula. You can check pretty quickly if you just do the square root part.